Detective Marcus Hale, a man whose presence seemed cut from the granite of the city itself, sat upright at the edge of his bed, his eyes already open before his hand reached the receiver. Hale was not remarkable in size, nor in appearance. His hair had long since begun retreating from his forehead, and lines carved his face with the weight of sleepless decades, but there was something unforgettable in the way he listened. His silence was not emptiness, it was gravity. When he listened, people felt pulled into confessing more than they intended, as though the stillness of his gaze held a mirror to their souls. Detective Hale. His voice was low, groggy yet steady. A river beneath ice, at first. There was no reply, just breath then, almost childlike, trembling across the line. Then a whisper, so faint he had to press the receiver hard against his ear. They're already dead, the line. Click dead. Hale sat motionless, the receiver buzzing its hollow tone, and in that electric hum, he felt the strings of something he had not felt in years, the cold curl of fear at the base of his spine. He lived alone in a small, one apartment above a shuttered bakery, the scent of old flour and yeast clinging forever in the air. But in that moment, the silence pressed against him like a living presence. He replaced the receiver slowly, as though moving too quickly might provoke something unseen in the room. It was not the first strange call he had received in his career, but this one carried no demand, no ransom, no prankster's thrill. It was a statement, absolute and chilling. They're already dead. The city outside his window, Penton, an industrial sprawl along the coast, was a restless organism that never truly slept. Even at this hour, distant machinery pulsed in the shipyards. Headlights crawled along the wet streets, and the occasional bark of laughter or anger from night dwellers broke through the fog. Hale knew the city intimately. Every alley had its ghosts, every tenement its whispers. But something in that voice, its fragility, its certainty, suggested not just another case, but a story woven in shadows, waiting to unfold. He dressed with methodical precision, his worn leather holster sliding into place under his jacket, his badge clipped like an unspoken oath. Before leaving, he paused in the kitchen, where a single photograph leaned against the wall. It showed a young girl with untamed curls and mischievous eyes, her smile the kind that threatened to erupt into laughter. She had been gone for years, lost in circumstances Hale never spoke of, and yet he never moved the photograph. Sometimes, in the quiet hours, it seemed to watch him the way only the dead can. The precinct at night was a cavern of buzzing fluorescent lights and paper stacked like brittle bones. Only a skeleton crew manned the desks, officers half dozing over reports or nursing stale coffee. Hale's partner, Detective Eleanor Ruiz, lifted her head as he entered. Ruiz was younger, sharp-eyed, with a quickness in her tone that often clashed with Hale's slow deliberation. Where he was stone, she was fire. "You look like hell," she said, pushing her chair back with a creak. "I got a call. From who?" He shook his head. "Didn't say. Just one sentence. They're already dead," then hung up. Ruiz frowned, her pen tapping against a half-finished incident form. "Could be a prank. You know how many lunatics call in at night." Didn't sound like a prank. Hale's eyes met hers, and she read something in them that made her stop tapping. "You think it's a tip. I think it's a warning. An hour later, the call would prove itself. A patrol car reported a disturbance at a derelict apartment complex on Blackthorn Street. One of those buildings left to rot when the city's pulse shifted elsewhere. Complaints of noise, maybe a fight. The responding officers found the front door ajar. They entered. Moments later, the radio crackled with words that shifted the precinct's atmosphere from weary routine to sharp alertness. Possible homicide. Multiple victims. Hale and Ruiz were among the first detectives on the scene. The building reeked of mildew and old smoke, its walls mottled with damp stains that resembled abstract maps of forgotten lands. The stairwell creaked under their steps, and the air grew colder with each floor. Apartment 3B's door gaped open like a wound. Inside, the darkness clung thick, interrupted only by the wavering flashlights of uniforms who looked pale and unsettled. On the living room floor lay 3 bodies, 2 adults, 1 child. Their faces were covered with sheets torn from a filthy mattress. A 4th sheet, soaked dark, suggested there had been no mercy in the act. No one spoke. The silence was not respect, it was fear, the kind that settled deep, heavy and inexplicable. Hale bent down slowly, his gloved hand lifting the edge of a sheet. Beneath it, the woman's face was pale, eyes wide open, lips slightly parted as though frozen in the middle of a word. There was no blood on her skin, but her expression bore something worse, terror etched so deep it seemed carved into her bones. Ruiz swallowed hard. Jesus. Hale dropped the sheet gently, his mind replaying the words from the phone call, now echoing with unbearable clarity. They're already dead. The timing was too exact. Whoever had called knew. The question gnawed at him. Had the voice belonged to the killer, or a witness too afraid to speak? As officers began to photograph the scene, Hale stepped into the narrow hallway leading to the bedrooms. The smell intensified there, metallic under the mold, and he felt a strange pull, as though the darkness itself urged him further. He paused at the doorway of a small room painted once in cheerful colors, now chipped and sickly. A child's toy, a stuffed rabbit missing, an ear lay face down near the bed. For a moment, the silence stretched into something unnatural. His flashlight flickered, briefly, and in that flicker, he thought he saw movement, a shape withdrawing deeper into shadow. But when the beam steadied, the room was empty. Still, the hair on his arms rose as though someone, unseen, had just slipped past him. And somewhere in the city, he knew another phone was waiting to ring. Morning brought no comfort to Blackthorn Street. The building stood like a mausoleum under the pallid light, its broken windows catching the sunrise like dead eyes. Police tape fluttered lazily in the damp breeze, and the gawkers who gathered at the curb whispered as though afraid their words might summon something still lurking inside. Detective Hale had been there all night, his eyes gritty, his shirt rumpled, but his mind sharpened by the grotesque clarity of exhaustion. He had walked through the apartment again and again, memorizing every detail: the overturned chair in the kitchen, the empty picture frames on the walls, the faint outline of crucifix nails above the doorway where Faith had once hung but abandoned her place. Yet the scene refused to give up its secrets. Beside him, Ruiz leaned against the railing, sipping burnt coffee from a paper cup. Her hair was tied back, her jaw tight. No forced entry, she muttered. No signs of struggle. They just died. They didn't just die. Hale replied softly, staring across the street where a row of rusted cars reflected pale sunlight. They were terrified before it happened. That's what I can't shake, Ruiz sighed, her breath steaming in the cold air. You're thinking about the call. I'm thinking about how the caller knew. Hale turned toward her, his eyes shadowed beneath his brow. They weren't warning us to prevent it. They were telling us after it already happened. Which means either the killer, or someone who watched it happen. Ruiz grimaced. Great. Psychopath who calls the cops for an audience. That's what we need. As they stood in silence, Captain Warren arrived, his broad frame cutting through the murmuring officers. Warren was a man of rigid authority, his voice perpetually gravel-coated from years of cigars. He looked at Hale with something between frustration and concern. "You should have told me about that call sooner. I told you as soon as the bodies turned up. That's not soon enough." Warren's tone was clipped. "If this lunatic is playing games with you, I need the whole department aware." Hale didn't respond. He wasn't in the mood for reprimands dressed as lectures. Warren exhaled hard and turned his attention to Ruiz. "Forensics says no obvious wounds. No toxins detected so far. We'll wait for autopsies, but this isn't a normal homicide. Whatever killed them, it wasn't conventional." Ruiz shifted uncomfortably. "You're saying what I think you're saying. That maybe it wasn't physical." Warren narrowed his eyes. "I'm saying don't speculate. Stick to what we can prove." But his voice lacked conviction, and both detectives noticed. Later that afternoon, Hale sat at his desk, the precinct humming round him. Case files stacked like weary soldiers, phones rang with complaints, radios hissed with chatter. Yet Hale heard none of it. He stared at the phone on his desk, waiting for it to come alive again. And then it did. The ring jolted him, sharp and sudden. He snatched the receiver. Detective Hale, the same breath-thin, fragile. "Then, you didn't save them." Hale's grip tightened on the receiver. "Who is this?" They saw it too. They screamed. "I tried to tell you, tell me what." But the line dissolved into static, a crackling hiss like distant thunder. He held on, his knuckles whitening, until the dial tone swallowed it whole. Across the bullpen, Ruiz watched him. Her face pale. Was it them again? Yes, his voice was low, threaded with something Ruiz had rarely heard from him in ease. That night, Hale returned to Blackthorn Street, alone. The tape still stretched across the doorway, the interior stripped of the victims, but heavy with their absence. The air inside seemed thicker, clinging to his skin, and the faint outline of where bodies had lain on the floor appeared darker than the rest of the carpet, as though shadows themselves had soaked in. He moved cautiously through the apartment, flashlight sweeping over the walls. The beam caught something he hadn't noticed before, thin scratch marks along the hallway leading to the child's room. They were small, shallow, erratic, as though made by fingernails desperate to find purchase. Kneeling, Hale traced them with his gloved hand. The image of the whispering caller bled into his thoughts there already dead. A floorboard creaked behind him. He spun, hand hovering near his weapon. Nothing. Only the empty living room, dim and silent. But he could feel it, the sensation of being observed, of unseen eyes lingering in the corners. Hale exhaled slowly, forcing the air through his lungs, grounding himself. He was a detective, not a man easily swayed by phantoms. Yet as he left the building, he couldn't shake the conviction that someone or something had walked the hall beside him. The following morning, Ruiz dropped a file onto his desk. "You want to see this?" Inside was the coroner's preliminary report. No trauma, no poison, no identifiable cause of death. The only detail of note, every victim's eyes were wide open, pupils dilated as if they had witnessed something impossible in their final moments. "That's not the worst part," Ruiz said, her tone hushed. She pulled out photographs recovered from the victim's apartment. One showed the family at a park, smiling awkwardly. But in the background, blurred yet unmistakable, stood a figure near the trees, tall, thin, face obscured by shadow. Another photograph, taken months earlier at a birthday party, showed the same figure at the edge of the frame, always distant, Always watching. Hale's throat tightened. Who took these? Neighbors say the father was paranoid. He kept taking pictures of their outings, like he was trying to prove something was following them. Everyone thought he was just unstable. Maybe he wasn't. Hale's voice was grim. The phone on his desk rang again. Both detectives froze. Hal lifted the receiver. "This is Hale." Static dot, then a voice, not just a whisper this time, but trembling words straining against fear. "It's not finished. They'll come for you too." The line went dead. Ruse's eyes met his, wide with alarm. "Marcus, what the hell are we dealing with?" Hale didn't answer. His mind was a storm, memory clawing its way forward, the photograph of his daughter on the kitchen counter, her mischievous smile. How often, in the weeks before she vanished, he had felt the weight of unseen eyes at the edge of his vision. Now, years later, the echoes had returned, and the caller's voice, fragile and desperate, seemed less like a stranger's and more like someone who had already been marked like him. Sleep became a foreign country for Detective Marcus Hale. He moved through the days in a half-dream, fueled by bitter coffee and the unshakable sensation of being stalked by something that thrived in silence. The precinct buzzed with other cases, but to Hale, everything blurred into background noise. The only sound that mattered was the sharp trill of a telephone and the fragile voice waiting on the other side. 3 nights after the discovery on Blackthorn Street, the call came again. Hale had taken to keeping the receiver pressed close at all hours, as though clutching it might anchor him to the living. When the ring pierced the apartment's midnight hush, his hand was already moving. "They're closer now," the voice breathed, hoarse, unraveling like thread. Hale swallowed, the cold of the phone seeping into his palm. "Who's closer? Talk to me. They're in the walls, watching. Listening. If you hear them, don't look." Static. A faint sob. Then silence. Hale sat in the dim light of his kitchen, the glow of the lone bulb making the shadows seem deeper, alive. He stared at the photograph of his daughter across the counter, her smile frozen in time, and for the first time in years, he spoke aloud to her absence. "If it's the same thing that took you, I swear I'll end it." At the precinct the next day, Ruiz confronted him with exhaustion etched on her face. "You can't keep doing this, Marcus. You're letting this thing get in your head. It's already there." His voice was quiet, but firm. The father knew something was following them. That's why he kept taking pictures. And the caller knows it's still out there. Ruiz slammed her hand on the desk, startling a few nearby officers. "You're chasing ghosts. We have no physical evidence, no suspect, nothing but creepy phone calls and your gut telling you shadows are real." Hale met her eyes, steady, unblinking. "When have I ever been wrong about a gut feeling?" Ruiz hesitated, then looked away. She knew his record Hale's instincts had solved cases no one else could untangle. But this felt different, too personal. That evening, they tracked down the apartment building's previous tenants, a woman named Lorraine Mays who had lived next door to the victims before moving out. She was jittery, her hands constantly twisting the strap of her purse, eyes darting toward corners as though expecting something to emerge. "They weren't normal," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I mean, they were kind, the parents polite. But they kept the curtains closed all the time. Said light made it easier for it to find them. It." Hale pressed gently. Lorraine's lips quivered. Tall thin no face. "I saw it once, in the hall. Thought it was a trick of the shadows. But then the boy he drew pictures of it. Left them taped to the walls. I told myself it was nothing. Kids have imaginations, right? But the drawings, they looked exactly like what I saw. To exact, she pulled a folded scrap of paper from her bag, a child's sketch, crude but unsettling, a long-limbed figure towering in the corner of a room. No features except hollow circles for eyes. Ruiz exhaled sharply. Jesus. Hale's jaw clenched. He had seen drawings like that before in his own daughter's notebooks, years ago, weeks before she disappeared. That night, unable to resist, Hale returned again to the crime scene. He stood in the child's bedroom, staring at the walls where faint tape residue still clung. He imagined the boy's small hands pressing sketches into place, a desperate attempt to give form to terror. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. No ringtone this time, just vibration. He pulled it out. And no number. He answered without hesitation. "You're standing where it stood," the voice whispered. It liked the boy. It likes you too. Hale's blood ran cold. He turned slowly, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, sweeping over peeling paint and the stuffed rabbit on the floor. Empty, yet the air pressed heavy against him, humming faintly in his ears, like static waiting to burst. The line continued, the voice breaking into sobs. "I can't stop it. None of us can stop it. Run while you can. Who are you?" Hale demanded, his voice hard but his chest tightening. "Why are you calling me?" The sobbing ceased. Then, faint laughter high, breathless, not from a child but something imitating one. The line went dead. Hale lowered the phone slowly, heart pounding against his ribs. The apartment was silent again, but silence no longer felt empty. It felt occupied. 2 days later, the autopsy reports came back inconclusive, but with one bizarre detail. The victims' eardrums showed signs of trauma, as though they had been subjected to an unbearable frequency, a sound too intense for human tolerance. Yet no neighbors had heard a thing. Hale brought this to Ruiz, who pinched the bridge of her nose. "So what are we supposed to say?" "A ghost screamed them to death." "Not a ghost." Hale's voice was steady, but his eyes burned with certainty. "Something that feeds on fear. Something that wants us to listen." That night, Hale received another call, but this time, he recorded it, the tape spinning in his old cassette machine. The voice came clearer than ever before, rising and falling in panic. "It doesn't like the light. It follows in the dark. Don't answer when it knocks. Don't look at its face. Please, please don't." A loud knock thundered at Hale's door. 3 sharp raps. His heart seized. He looked at the door, then at the phone in his hand. The voice on the line whispered, trembling, "Don't open it." The knocking came again, louder. Hale stood frozen in his kitchen, the phone pressed against his ear, the photograph of his daughter watching from the counter. Every instinct screamed at him to draw his gun, to confront whatever stood outside. But deeper than instinct was dread, primal and unyielding. And in that dread, he realized something horrifying. The knocking wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from inside the walls. The sound within the walls did not fade. It grew, spreading through Hale's apartment like a pulse, a living heartbeat hidden in plaster and brick. The phone, still pressed to his ear, carried the caller's ragged breathing fast, shallow, desperate. "It's there," the voice trembled. "It likes when you notice. You've already let it in." Hale's grip tightened on the receiver. "What do you want from me?" The voice fell silent. For a long moment, only the thrum in the walls answered. Then, a whisper so faint Hale thought it might be his own mind. It wants you to remember. The line went dead. The silence that followed was heavier than noise. Hale lowered the receiver slowly, his eyes darting to the corners of the apartment. The shadows seemed thicker, as though they had substance. Creeping closer when his gaze faltered, he reached for his gun, the weight of it grounding him. But he knew instinctively that bullets meant nothing here. The photograph of his daughter on the counter caught his attention. For years, her image had been static, a frozen memory. But now, under the weak kitchen light, Hale swore her smile looked different, less playful, more knowing, as though she too were aware of the thing pressing against the walls. A sudden crash shattered the moment. The picture frame toppled face down onto the counter, glass splintering across the linoleum. Hale's breath came sharp, his body stiff with dread. And then his phone rang again. He hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him not to answer. But the pull was irresistible. He lifted the receiver. This time, the voice was not fragile or trembling. It was steady, familiar. "Dad." Hale's knees nearly buckled. His chest constricted as though iron bands had wrapped round his ribs. "Anna," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's so dark here," the voice continued, soft and young, carrying the lilt of memory he had replayed 1,000 nights in dreams. "I've been waiting. You didn't come for me." Hale's throat tightened. "I looked everywhere," he whispered, tears stinging his eyes. "I never stopped. You stopped." The voice accused, gentler than anger, crueler than hate. "But you can still come now. Just listen. Just follow." Static swallowed her words, then cleared into a faint humming, low, steady, almost like the hum in the walls. And in that hum, Hale thought he heard layered voices, whispers overlapping, dozens, maybe hundreds, all murmuring in unison. Ruse's voice cut through his haze, startling him. She had been calling his cell non-stop, finally forcing him to answer. "Marcus, where the hell are you? You've been off the grid all night." Hale swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. "It's here, Helena. The thing the boy saw. The thing Anna saw. It's been following all of us." There was a pause, then Ruse's voice dropped low. "Marcus, listen to me. Whatever you think you're hearing, it isn't real. It's using you. Don't give it what it wants." But Hale no longer knew which voice to believe. His daughter's memory echoed louder than Ruse's warnings. The knocking resumed, this time from every wall at once, rapid and relentless, like countless fists pounding to be let inside. Hale covered one ear, the phone pressed to the other, his body trembling with the cacophony. Then, abruptly, everything stopped. Silence fell, and from the darkness of the hallway, a shape emerged, tall or thin, limbs too long, joints bending wrong, its form half swallowed by shadow yet undeniable, its faceless head tilted, as if studying him. For a heartbeat, Hale was a child again, paralyzed in the dark, his fear raw offering. The phone in his hand burned hot, the plastic searing his palm. But he couldn't let go. A single phrase hissed through the line, layered in countless voices, including Anna's, "Come with us." Time fractured. Hale saw flashes his daughter at the park, laughing, the victims on Blackthorn Street, their eyes frozen wide, his own reflection in the darkened glass of his window, pale and hollow-eyed. The thing in the hall loomed larger, filling the apartment, pressing reality thin. He raised his gun, hands shaking. "If you're real," he rasped, "you'll bleed." The faceless figure tilted its head. And then, with a speed that shattered reason, it vanished, leaving only the whisper of static in its wake. The phone slipped from Hale's grasp, clattering to the floor. The line was still alive. Voices hissing, repeating. They're already dead. They're already dead. They're already dead. When Ruiz arrived minutes later, Hale's apartment was in shambles. The furniture overturned. The glass shattered. The photograph of his daughter split in two. But Hale himself was gone. The only thing left was the phone, receiver hanging loose, whispering endlessly into the empty room. The department filed Hale's disappearance as unsolved. Official reports listed stress-induced breakdown, possible abduction, or voluntary flight. Ruiz didn't believe any of them. She had seen the photographs, heard the recordings, and sometimes, in the dead of night, her own phone rang silent numbers, breathing faintly on the other end. She never answered for long, but once, unable to resist, she held on just long enough to hear a voice she knew, steady and low, carved with the weight of sleepless decades. "Eleanor," it said, "don't look in the walls." Then the line went dead. Sergeant Daniel Mercer of the State Highway Patrol had driven the same 30-mile stretch of Route 6 for nearly 2 decades. He was a man carved by routine, square jaw hidden beneath stubble, broad shoulders carrying the quiet patience of someone who had seen more wreckage than glory. Mercer wasn't extraordinary in looks or charm, but he had something rare, an ability to remember everything. License plates glimpsed once in the rain, the smell of antifreeze on a busted engine, the exact words of a drunk driver's half-slurred confession. His memory was a vault, and though it weighed on him, it made him a legend among fellow officers. On the night it began, Mercer was cruising past mile marker 47, headlights carving a pale tunnel through the fog. The radio crackled faintly with dispatch chatter noise he had long ago learned to tune out until a call cut through with unusual sharpness. "Unit 12. Unit 12. Do you copy?" Mercer adjusted the volume. The dispatcher's voice trembled. "We've lost contact with Unit 9. Last reported position, also mile marker 47. Mercer's brows furrowed. Unit 9 was a rookie duo, Carter and Sing Young, eager, still too green to recognize when their own confidence was bluff. They had checked in less than 10 minutes ago. He keyed the mic. "This is Unit 12. I'm at 46, heading in now. Etta, 2 minutes, copy. Unit 12. Use caution." The fog thickened as he closed in, swallowing the world beyond his beams. The road narrowed between tree lines, their bare branches glowing toward the stars. His engine's hum seemed too loud, his own breathing harsh in the confined silence. Then he saw it. Unit 9's cruiser sat on the shoulder, lights flashing in rhythmic blue and red, but the doors gaped open. No sign of the officers. Mercer pulled behind, tires crunching gravel. Adrenaline sharpening his focus, he stepped out, the night air biting cold. Hand instinctively brushing the grip of his sidearm. "Carter? Sing." His voice carried into the mist, swallowed quickly by the trees. The radio on Unit 9's dashboard hissed with static. Papers fluttered across the front seat, reports half-written. Two steaming coffee cups sat in the holders, one still half full. It looked as though they had stepped away only moments ago. But the woods were silent. No movement, no birds, no crickets. Just the faint pulse of the cruiser's lights and the restless fog weaving between trunks. Mercer circled the vehicle, his boots soft against the wet earth. He found tracks leading toward the tree line to sets of footprints, deliberate at first, then staggered, irregular, as though the men had begun to run. He followed them several yards until they vanished abruptly. into the damp ground, as though the earth itself had swallowed them. The silence deepened. He could hear his own pulse now, hammering in his ears. He raised his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I've located Unit 9's cruiser, but the officers are missing. Repeat, officers are missing. Request immediate backup to mile marker 47. Static filled the line." Then nothing. Mercer tried again, switching frequencies. Nothing but the low hiss, like breathing caught between wires. A twig snapped behind him. He spun, weapon raised, but the beam of his flashlight revealed only fog rolling thicker. The road was gone from view, the world reduced to a small circle of light and the sound of his own breath. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a tall shape shifting between the trees, there and gone in an instant. His finger tightened on the trigger, but he forced himself to stillness. He was a veteran. He didn't shoot shadows. Instead, he called out, voice steadier than he felt. "Carter, Singh, report." The fog stirred, and then, faintly, he heard it, the squawk of a police radio somewhere deeper in the woods. He followed the sound, boots sinking into wet leaves. Flashlight cutting a path through the void, the radio crackled again. Closer now, with fragments of speech voices he recognized. Carter's, Singh's. "Don't? No. God." "Run!" The rest dissolved into static. Mercer broke into a run, branches slashing against his jacket, until he stumbled into a small clearing. His flashlight swept across the ground, and there it was. Unit 9's radio, lying in the dirt, its casing cracked, speaker still hissing with broken voices. But there were no officers. Only the radio. Mercer crouched, breath heavy, eyes scanning the tree line. Something was wrong with the clearing. The fog didn't drift naturally here it circled, coiling like smoke caught in a jar. And in the center, near the abandoned radio, the earth was blackened, as though scorched by fire. He reached out, fingers brushing the soil. It was warm. The radio squawked again, and this time the voice was clear. Mercer, his blood ran cold. It was Singh's voice, strained, terrified. "Don't stay here." The line cut. Mercer staggered back, chest heaving. His flashlight flickered, beam shrinking, dying. The darkness pressed in, absolute. And in that darkness, he felt it the weight of unseen eyes, watching from every angle. He turned and ran, crashing through the trees until he broke onto the road, gasping for air. The cruiser still sat where he had left it, lights pulsing in rhythmic silence. But now, another set of tire tracks stretched away from it, long, fresh grooves in the wet asphalt. Mercer froze, because he hadn't heard another car arrive. And the tracks led straight into the fog, vanishing at mile marker 47. By dawn, mile marker 47 had become a crime scene. Patrol cars lined the shoulder, their lights flashing weakly in the grey morning. Detectives trudged through the fog with radios strapped to their chests, voices clipped, eyes weary. But Sergeant Daniel Mercer felt none of the reassurance he usually did when backup arrived. The fog seemed thicker than ever, muffling every word, swallowing every echo. Carter and Singh's cruiser had been towed. Evidence techs swept the area, collecting soil samples, photographing tire marks. But there was no trace of the missing rookies, no blood, no struggle. Just the footprints that ended abruptly at the tree line and the radio Mercer had found still spitting static in the dirt. Captain Reeves arrived mid-morning, a sharp-featured man whose tone carried the steel of command. He pulled Mercer aside, away from the chatter. "You are the first on scene." Walk me through it. Mercer recounted everything. The empty cruiser, the footprints, the voices through the radio, the scorched clearing. Reeve listened, his expression neutral, but his eyes narrowing slightly at the mention of voices. "You're saying you heard them call your name?" Mercer nodded. Reeve's lips pressed thin. The rookies could have staged it. Kids panic. They run. Maybe ditch the radio. Doesn't add up, but neither does vanishing into thin air. "Sir, this wasn't staged." Mercer's tone was firm, his voice carrying the weight of conviction. "Something happened out there. I don't know what. But it wasn't just them running scared." Reeves studied him for a long moment before finally exhaling through his nose. "All right, you'll stay on it. But keep this tight. Last thing we need is rumors of phantom patrols scaring the hell out of the department." By evening, Mercer returned alone. Not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't stay away. The sun had set, and mile marker 47 looked even more desolate under moonlight. His headlights carved pale swaths through the fog, catching glimpses of the trees that loomed like silent sentinels. He parked at the shoulder, engine idling, and sat with both hands gripping the wheel. For a long while, he simply listened, the low purr of the motor, the faint hum of the radio, his own breath. Then, softly, through the static, Mercer, his heart jolted. He grabbed the mic, Carter, saying, "Where are you?" Silence. Then, "Don't follow." The radio crackled violently and went dead. Mercer sat frozen, the mic heavy in his hand. His instincts screamed for him to turn back, to drive away and let someone else chase phantoms. But his duty, his memory wouldn't let him. He shut off the engine, stepped out, and let the night swallow him whole. The woods were colder now, the air thick with moisture. His flashlight beam danced across bark slick with dew, roots twisting through the soil like veins. He retraced the path to the clearing where he had found the scorched earth. It was different this time. The ground still bore the same blackened scar, but someone or something had placed objects in the center. 3 police radios lined up neatly. Not just Carter and Singh's, but another older model, scuffed, the kind the department hadn't used in years. Mercer crouched, hand hovering. He could feel warmth radiating off them, unnatural in the damp chill. He lifted the oldest radio cautiously. Its surface was warm, almost hot, and when he clicked it on, it immediately came alive with static. Then a voice. Not Carter's, not Singh's. "Unit 12, do you copy?" Mercer froze. That voice, he hadn't heard it in 15 years. It was Officer Paul Jennings, his old partner. Jennings had vanished during a midnight patrol on the very same stretch of highway. His cruiser was found abandoned at mile marker 47. His body never recovered. Mercer's grip tightened. "Paul, the radio hissed." Then Jennings' voice again, faint, strained. "We can't leave. It won't let us. Get out while you still." The transmission cut into a high-pitched whine that made Mercer drop the device, clutching his ear. The forest seemed to close round him, trees crowding closer, shadows deepening. His flashlight flickered, and for an instant, in its dying beam, he saw them. Figures, dozens, scattered between the trees, barely visible through the fog. Officers in uniform, pale, unmoving, eyes hollow. Some he recognized from old photographs of missing patrolmen. Others were strangers, their badges tarnished with time. All of them standing silently, watching. His light died completely. Darkness rushed in. Mercer stumbled back, gun drawn, breath ragged. His ears filled with whispers overlapping, layered, a chorus of lost voices. They weren't coming from the woods. They were bleeding through his radio, overlapping into a storm of words. Don't stop. Can't escape. It's in the road. It's in the fog. The overlapping voices surged until they were unbearable, then cut off all at once, leaving a silence so deep it rang in his skull. And then footsteps. Behind him. He turned sharply, gun raised, but there was nothing. Only fog swirling in slow patterns. But the ground beneath his boots had changed. No longer damp earth, it was scorched, black, warm. He was standing in the center of the circle again, though he had stepped out minutes before. Mercer's pulse thundered. He ran, breaking through the tree line, crashing onto the asphalt of Route 6. His cruiser loomed ahead, lights still idling. Relief surged through him until he realized the engine was off, and the driver's side door was open. Mercer raised his weapon cautiously, approaching. The inside of the cruiser smelled of burnt wires, the radio on the dash sparking faintly. On the seat lay his own notebook, the one he had left locked in the glove box. Only now it was open, and across its pages, in handwriting not his own, 3 words repeated over and over. Mile marker 47. The fog thickened, swallowing the road in both directions. Mercer stood in the flashing red blue light of his cruiser, gripping his gun, notebook in the other hand, and for the first time in his career, he wondered if he had already crossed a line from which he could never return. Because somewhere in the static, he thought he still heard Jennings' voice, calling from a place Mercer could not follow. 2 days later, Mercer hadn't slept more than a handful of hours. His apartment fell to quiet, the ticking of the clock too loud, every creak of the floorboards pulling him back to the woods. He replayed the voices on the radio over and over in his head, Jennings' words bleeding into Carter's desperate pleas. It wasn't just missing officers, it was decades of patrolmen being swallowed by that stretch of asphalt. And no one wanted to talk about it. Captain Reeves had filed the case as active missing persons, language Mercer recognized as a bureaucratic lid to keep everything contained. The rookies' families were left with bland reassurances. And Jennings? He had been written off years ago, his memory reduced to a plaque at the precinct and a cautionary tale about tired cops drifting off the road. But Mercer knew better. He had seen them. On the 3rd night, he drove back out. No radio call had sent him. No captain's order. He told no one. His cruiser hummed along Route 6, tires singing below him against the pavement. He was chasing something now, not justice, not duty, but an answer he feared might consume him whole. At mile marker 47, he slowed. The fog seemed to thicken instantly, and natural in its timing, like a curtain lowering on a stage. He parked at the shoulder, headlights carving short tunnels through the grey. For a moment, he simply sat, knuckles tight on the wheel. Then another set of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. A second cruiser pulled in behind him. Officer Elaine Porter stepped out, a sharp-eyed woman with short hair tucked under her cap. She had joined the force 5 years ago and carried herself like someone who'd seen her share of midnight wrecks but still had steel in her spine. Sergeant Mercer, she said, approaching his window, her breath fogging in the cold. You think I wouldn't notice you running out here every night without backup? He sighed, climbing out to meet her. This isn't a place for rookies. I'm not a rookie. And I'm not blind either. Her eyes narrowed. Words going around you're chasing ghosts. Is it true? Mercer met her gaze. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me. So he did. Briefly, clipped. The radios, the voices. Jennings, the figures in the fog. She didn't flinch, didn't laugh, when he finished. She only nodded once. My uncle, she said quietly, disappeared on this road. 30 years ago, he was a trooper. Nobody in my family ever got an answer. They told us it was fatigue, maybe foul play. But he was careful. Too careful. This, she gestured at the looming fog. This sounds like him. Mercer studied her for a long moment before nodding. Then you understand why I can't stop. Together, they stepped into the tree line. The woods were darker than before, as though the fog itself had weight, muffling even their footsteps. They moved in silence, beams cutting narrow paths, until they reached the clearing. The scorched earth was wider now, as if it had spread. And at the center, something new. Not radios this time, a badge. Mercer's chest tightened as he bent to pick it up. The metal was blackened, edges warped. But the number stamped on it was unmistakable. Jennings, he whispered. The badge pulsed with faint heat. Porter touched his arm, nodding toward the trees. Figures were gathering again, pale silhouettes standing just beyond the reach of their light. Dozens of them. This time, they were closer. Mercer raised his voice. Carter, sing. If you're here, show yourselves. The figures didn't move. But the radios clipped to their own belt-soled models. Some rusted. Some broken crackled in unison. The forest filled with static, overlapping until it formed words. You shouldn't have come back. Porter's hand hovered near her weapon. What are they? Mercer swallowed hard. They were us. The static surged, drowning his words. A shadow peeled forward from the line of figures, taller than the rest, movements jerky like a puppet pulled by unseen strings. Its eyes glowed faintly, not with light, but with reflection, like an animal caught in beams. It spoke, but its mouth didn't move. The sound came from Mercer's radio. You belong here, too. The ground vibrated under their boots, the scorched circle widening in faint cracks that glowed red. Porter cursed, pulling Mercer back. We need to move. They ran, but the woods twisted impossibly, every path curving back toward the clearing. The fog thickened, blinding, until Mercer couldn't even see Porter, though her footsteps thundered beside him. Then, silence. He spun. She was gone. Porter, his shot vanished into the fog. No answer. His radio. Squawked. Porter's voice came through, frantic. Mercer, God. I can't. Static drowned her. Replaced by whispers. Figures emerged from the fog again, surrounding him. Their faces pale, hollow, features blurred like unfinished sketches. Among them, he saw Jennings. His old partner stepped forward, uniform pristine despite the years, eyes sunken but filled with something human regret. Dan, Jennings said, his voice cutting clear through Mercer's radio. You can't fight it. No one can. Mercer's throat tightened. Then help me. Tell me how to get them back. Carter. Sing. Porter. Jennings' face flickered with pain. It takes. That's all it knows. The road feeds it. The fog keeps it. We're all pieces now. Mercer shook his head violently. No. I don't accept that. There has to be a way out. The fog pulsed round them, heavy with unseen force. Jennings reached out, hand trembling. Then you'll join us. The ground split at Mercer's feet, heat rising, and from below came a sound like engines, hundreds of them idling in unison. He staggered back, heart pounding. Suddenly, Headlights pierced the fog. A cruiser, barreling toward the clearing, horn blaring. Porter's voice screamed from the speaker, "Move!" Mercer dove aside as the cruiser plowed through the figures, scattering them like mist. Porter leaned out the window, eyes wide. "Get in." He scrambled into the passenger seat as she floored it, the trees whipping by in blurs. Behind them, the fog rift, shapes shifting, voices rising in a deafening chorus. "Did you see them?" Mercer panted. Porter's knuckles were white on the wheel. "I saw enough. And I don't ever want to see it again." They burst onto Route 6, the open road ahead. The fog clung to the tree line, but did not follow. Only when they were miles away did Porter slow. The silence inside the cruiser was thick, broken only by the hum of the engine. Mercer clutched Jennings' scorched badge in his hand, the metal still warm. "We're not done," he said, voice raw. "It won't stop. Not until we end it." Porter glanced at him, face pale but resolute. "Then we go back." "But not tonight." Mercer nodded slowly. For the first time, he wasn't alone, but in the static of his radio, faint and mocking, Jennings' voice whispered again, "You'll be back." Sleep never came easy after that night. Mercer sat in his apartment, Jennings' scorched badge resting on his desk like a cursed relic, and listened to the quiet murmur of his radio long after shift hours ended. The faint hiss of static seemed alive now, a subtle heartbeat that reminded him the fog was waiting, patient as the grave. Porter visited once, eyes shadowed by exhaustion. She didn't have to say it. He saw in her face the same dread, the same pull, the same hunger to understand. They were both marked. 2 weeks later, the road claimed another. A state trooper vanished during a traffic stop near mile marker 47. His dash cam was found still recording, headlights painting the trees. The sound of his voice calling out, "Sir, stay in the vehicle." Before dissolving into static, the cruiser was recovered, doors open. Lights flashing, no officer, no suspect, just the fog. The department's silence became unbearable. Reports were buried, family members silenced with ongoing investigation letters, while the captains muttered about operational hazards and driver fatigue. Mercer slammed his fist into Reeves' desk. "They're dying out there, and you're doing nothing." Reeves' weary eyes lifted, voice cracking like old paper. "You think I don't know? My brother was one of them. And if you're smart, Dan, you'll stop before that road swallows you too." But Mercer couldn't stop. Neither could Porter. They planned it like a raid. Extra flashlights, flare guns, a trunk full of old police radios scavenged from the precinct basement, some so ancient their leather straps were cracked with age. Porter brought her uncle's badge, polished, gleaming like new. Mercer carried Jennings' scorched one. "This ends tonight," she said as they pulled onto Route 6. Her jaw was tight, determination masking fear. At mile marker 47, the fog welcomed them. Mercer parked deliberately on the shoulder, engine idling. He clipped both badges to his vest-like armor. Together, they stepped into the tree line. The woods swallowed them instantly. The clearing was waiting. The scorched earth pulsed faintly as if alive, and when Mercer dropped the box of radios into the dirt, they hissed to life, dozens of frequencies crackling at once. The air vibrated with layered voices: Jennings, Carter, Singh, Porter's uncle, and others too far gone to name. Porter whispered, "They're trapped." Figures emerged, hundreds this time, lining the trees. Hollow-eyed, uniforms torn by decades, faces blurred as if smeared by fog. The badge on Mercer's chest grew hot, Jennings' voice cutting through all others. "You shouldn't have come back, Dan." Mercer raised his voice. "We're not here to join you. We're here to end this." A ripple moved through the figures, their radio sparking, static rising to a shriek. The ground cracked wider, red light spilling upward. Porter dropped to her knees, pressing her uncle's badge into the scorched dirt. "Take it back, damn you. Let them go." The fog surged, coiling round them. A shape rose from the fissure towering, faceless, woven from the uniforms and radios of the lost. Its voice came from every speaker, every frequency, a chorus of the damned. "It feeds, it keeps, you are ours." Mercer's chest tightened. But he lifted his flare gun, firing into the heart of the fog. The red light cut through the haze. And for a moment, he saw Jennings, clearly his partner, standing among the lost. Eyes pleading, Jennings mouthed words Mercer had seen 100 times across briefing tables and... "Stakeouts, trust me." Mercer understood. He unclipped Jennings' badge and hurled it into the fissure. Porter followed, throwing her uncle's badge after. The ground convulsed, the figures shrieking, their shapes blurring and dissolving. The entity howled in radio static, the sound so loud Mercer's ears bled. The clearing ignited in blinding white. Heat seared their skin. The radios in the dirt exploded one by one, sparks raining like fireflies. Mercer shielded his eyes, felt the world tilt, and then silence. When the light faded, the clearing was empty. No figures, no voices. The scorch marks were gone, the ground whole again, as if nothing had ever happened. Mercer collapsed to his knees, lungs burning. Porter helped him up, her face pale, streaked with ash. They stumbled back toward the road. The fog was lifting, curling away like smoke after a fire. For the first time in months, the stars were visible above the tree line. On the highway shoulder, they stopped, leaning against the cruiser. The radio inside was quiet. No static, no whispers, just silence. Porter broke it first, her voice hoarse. "Do you think it's over?" Mercer stared down Route 6, where the asphalt stretched straight and endless into the night. "I think we bought time, but the road's still here. And roads don't forget." She nodded, accepting the weight of it. Together, they drove back, headlights carving tunnels through the last wisps of fog. Weeks passed. No new disappearances were reported. The road remained quiet. Families received anonymous letters in the mail badges returned, cleaned, engraved with nothing but the words never forgotten. No fingerprints, no explanation. Mercer kept his distance from Route 6, but sometimes, late at night, he swore he heard faint static in his radio, not hostile, not hungry, just grateful. One evening, sitting alone in his apartment, he raised a glass of whiskey toward the quiet speaker. "Rest easy." Jennings, for a heartbeat, the radio crackled back, a single word. Barely audible, "Thanks," and then silence again. Mercer let out a long breath, leaning back, eyes closed. He didn't know if the fog was gone forever, or if it would return for more. But he knew one thing: when it came back, he wouldn't face it alone. Porter would be there, and together. They would keep the road from feeding, at least for as long as they could. The first time Officer Helen Ruiz stepped onto Ashbury Lane, she swore the air itself recoiled against her skin. It was a quiet street, a cul-de-sac lined with modest, aging houses, each one sagging under decades of weather and neglect. But number 61 was different. Its windows were boarded from the inside, the lawn grown wild, the mailbox stuffed with years of uncollected flyers that hung limp in the damp night there. The call had come just after midnight, a break-in reported by a neighbor who claimed to hear banging inside. Ruiz had been in uniform for 3 years. But something about the dispatch made her stomach tighten. The operator's voice was unnaturally flat, monotone, as though repeating words from someone else's script. Unit 34. Respond to 61 Ashbury Lane. Possible intruder. Use caution. She almost ignored the shiver in her gut. But the moment she parked the cruiser under the flickering street lamp, the sense of wrongness grew. The house loomed in the silence, its peeling paint shining pale under the moon. A single upstairs window faintly glowing with light from no visible source. Ruiz adjusted her vest, stepped out, and pulled her maglite from her belt. Her boots crunched over broken glass scattered on the walkway. The front door was shut, locked tight. No sign of forced entry. But inside, she heard it. A low, rhythmic thudding, as if someone were knocking on a door over and over, but from deep within the house. Before entering, she keyed her radio. Dispatch. This is 34. I'm at location. Possible movement inside. Requesting backup. Static. She frowned. Tried again. Nothing but a faint hiss. It was rare for the signal to drop in this part of town. Ruiz took a breath, gripped her flashlight tighter, and tested the door. Locked. She circled to the back, finding the kitchen door ajar. With splintered near the latch, she exhaled slowly, drew her weapon, and stepped inside. The house smelled of mildew and rust, thick and cloying, as if the air hadn't been stirred in years. Her light cut across wallpaper curling at the edges, furniture draped with dusty sheets. Yet the thudding continued steady, unhurried, patient. She followed it deeper, past the living room, where old family photos hung crooked on the walls, the faces blurred as though smeared by damp fingers. Her radio crackled suddenly. She froze. Ruiz, the voice was faint. Male. Distorted. She lifted the mic. Dispatch. Say again. No reply, just a faint whisper. Don't open it. Her skin prickled. She spun in place, light sweeping the corners, but there was no one. The thudding grew louder, now distinctly from the basement door at the end of the hall. Her throat tightened. That door was shut, locked with a heavy padlock. Dust covered the handle, undisturbed for years, yet the sound came from behind it. Relentless. Thud, thud, thud. Ruiz approached slowly, each step heavier than the last. Her hand hovered near the lock, fingertips brushing cold metal. She wanted to retreat, call it in, wait for backup, but something pulled her forward, a compulsion, a whisper in the back of her mind. Urging, look inside. Her radio hissed again. Louder now. Don't. She almost dropped the mic, and then silence. The thudding stopped. She stared at the basement door, her breath fogging in the cold. Her instincts screamed to leave, but training rooted her in place. The silence was worse than the sound, pressing into her ears until she could hear her own blood rushing. Ruiz forced herself to back away. She returned to the living room, sweeping it again. On the mantel above the covered fireplace lay a stack of police reports, yellowed with age, pages culling. She picked one up, her gloved fingers trembling as she read the heading. Missing Persons Report. Officer David Halloway filed. October 17, 1994, last seen responding to a disturbance at 61 Ashbury Lane. Her breath caught. She flipped through the rest. More reports. More names, officers she vaguely remembered from academy walls, from old precinct photos. Each one with the same last known address, 61 Ashbury Lane. She dropped the papers as if burned. The house groaned, with settling, or perhaps breathing, the radio flared again. Sharp and sudden, Ruiz, leave. This time, the voice was unmistakable. It was her father's. He had been a cop too. He had died on duty when she was 10. Her knees weakened, heart pounding. Her father's voice whispered through the static, soft. Desperate. Don't open the door. The basement thudded again. Louder, faster, as if something. Inside knew she was listening. Louise staggered back, torn between duty and dread. She wanted to run, to flee the house and never return. But her flashlight beam fell on something at the foot of the basement door, a badge. Tarnished, cracked, she bent down, hands trembling, and lifted it. The engraving was faint but still visible. Officer David Halloway, the house moaned. Again, and the padlock rattled violently. Ruiz clutched the badge to her chest, backing away, eyes wide. She had no idea how it had ended up outside the door or what that meant for the man who had carried it. But as she stumbled toward the kitchen, her radio whispered one last time. Her father's voice fading into static. Don't come back. She burst out into the night, gasping the damp air like it was her first breath in hours. The street was silent, the glow in the upstairs window gone. When she looked back, the house seemed smaller, still, innocent. But she knew better, because the badge in her hand was real. And so was the sound of that door still knocking, faintly, even as she drove away. Helen Ruiz didn't sleep that night. The badge sat on her kitchen table beneath the harsh light, its tarnished surface reflecting like a half-shut eye. She kept picking it up, turning it in her hands, hoping the engraving would change, hoping David Halloway would blur into something else. But it didn't. It stayed as it was, proof that she had touched something she should not have. Proof that her father had not lied when he told her, just before dying, to stay out of the shadows. By morning, exhaustion gnawed at her nerves. She brought the badge into the precinct wrapped in a handkerchief, not sure how to explain it. She found Sergeant Connors in his office, the veteran cop who had been her father's partner for nearly a decade. Connors looked up from his paperwork, his face a map of lines etched by smoke, whiskey, and grief. "You look like hell," he said flatly. She set the badge on his desk. "You tell me what this is." He froze. His eyes scanned the tarnished metal, and for the first time in her career, Helen saw fear break across his face. His hand hovered, not daring to touch it. "Where the hell did you get this? Ashbury Lane," she said. "Last night. Call came in for a break-in. I found it outside the basement door." Connors leaned back, his chair creaking. Jesus Christ. He rubbed his jaw, the stubble rasping under his fingers. "I told them to burn that place. Years ago. What are you talking about?" He finally picked up the badge, holding it like a dead insect. "David Halloway was a rookie when I was your age. Bright kid. Went missing on a routine call to that house. Just gone. No body. No signs of a fight. Nothing. They listed him here. But we knew better." He met her eyes, voice low. "That house eats cops, Helen. Always has." Her stomach twisted. There were reports, Connors. Stacks of them. Officers who disappeared in that house, going back decades. His eyes darkened. They buried those files. Internal affairs, city council, even the mayor. You don't put stories like that in circulation. You don't tell citizens that some houses are hungrier than prisons. Helen leaned forward, frustration sharpening her tone. Then why the hell is it still standing? Because every time someone tries to tear it down, something happens. Workers quit. Machinery breaks. One guy, he stopped himself, jaw tightening. Look, you did your job. You went in, you saw enough. Now drop it before it takes you too. But Helen couldn't drop it. She saw her father's face in her mind, the night before he died, warning her never to follow his footsteps too far. She heard his voice in the static, whispering to stay away. But he hadn't said why, and Helen couldn't live with not knowing. She pressed harder. My father was there, wasn't he? That house had something to do with his death. Connor's silence told her everything. His eyes glistened, just for a moment, before the mask fell back in place. You need to let your father rest, he muttered. But Helen didn't let go. That night, against every warning, she drove back to Ashbury Lane. This time, she wasn't alone. Detective Marcus Shaw sat in the passenger seat, one hand resting lazily on the grip of his holstered sidearm. Shaw was an odd one, methodical, unnervingly calm, with a fascination for the cases nobody else wanted. He and Helen had crossed paths months earlier on a homicide, and when she told him about Ashbury, he hadn't laughed. He hadn't dismissed her. He'd simply said, "Show me." They parked beneath the same flickering lamp. The house seemed unchanged, yet somehow more awake. The upstairs window glowed again, a dim yellow square that pulsed like a heartbeat. Shaw studied it with detached interest. "You feel that?" he asked softly. "What? The air?" "Like it doesn't want us here," Helen swallowed. "Last night, the radio went dead. I heard voices. Warnings. Whose? My father's." Shaw turned his head, expression unreadable. Then he said, almost approvingly, "Then we're in the right place." They entered through the same kitchen door. The mildew stench hit them harder this time, as if the house recognized them. Their flashlights sliced the dark, catching cobwebs trembling like strands of wet hair. Helen led him to the basement door. It was locked again, the heavy padlock glistening as though newly placed. She showed him where she had found the badge, but the floor was bare now, dust untouched. Shaw crouched, studying the door. "You heard knocking, yes. Like someone trapped inside. Let's see." He rapped the door with his knuckles, listening. The house groaned in reply, a sound that rose up through the floorboards and into their bones. Suddenly, her radio hissed. Helen froze, heart hammering. Helen. It was the same voice. Her father's. "Go upstairs." Her throat closed. She glanced at Shaw, who was watching her with curious intensity. "You recognize it?" he asked. She nodded. "It's him." Shaw didn't question her sanity. He simply said, "Then we go." They climbed the staircase, each step complaining under their weight. At the top, the faint yellow glow leaked from a door at the end of the hall. As they approached, Helen's skin burned cold, like the air itself was pressing against her. She reached for the knob. It turned easily. The room was a child's bedroom. Toys scattered the floor, a rocking horse listing to one side, a mobile of stars dangling from the ceiling. Its paper moons faded. The glow came from a lamp on the nightstand, and on the bed sat a stack of photographs. Helen's knees weakened as she picked one up. It was her father, standing in uniform outside the precinct, smiling. Another showed Connor's beside him. Another her as a child, held in her father's arms. Her stomach churned. None of these photographs had ever been in her house. None had ever been taken, as far as she knew. Shaw picked up a frame from the nightstand. Inside was a picture of Helen herself, in uniform, standing in front of Ashbury Lane. She dropped it immediately, glass shattering. The house moaned. The padlock downstairs rattled violently. Then the radio screamed static. Through the shriek came her father's voice, urgent, terrified. "Don't let it open." From the basement, the thudding resumed. Louder, faster, furious. Shaw pulled her toward the door. "We need to go. Now." But Helen stood frozen, clutching the photo of her father, her heart breaking under the weight of questions. Who had taken these? How did they end up here? And why did the house want her to see them? The thudding downstairs turned into pounding. Wood splintered. The house shuddered, lights flickering as if something massive was trying to break free. Helen ran, Shaw close behind, the staircase trembling under their boots. They burst out the kitchen door into the night air just as a thunderous crack split the silence behind them. The basement door had shattered open, and from the darkness below, something began to crawl. The night air burned cold against Helen's lungs as she sprinted to the car, Shaw at her side, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly over the dead grass. Behind them, the house groaned like a wounded beast, its windows rattling, the roof timbers shaking in protest. And then came the sound, an unnatural dragging, wet and deliberate, echoing from the basement as though something too large for the walls was pulling itself toward the surface. They dove into the cruiser, door slamming. Helen twisted the key, engine roaring to life, headlights stabbing the dark. For one horrifying second she thought the wheels would refuse to move, that the house had grown invisible chains to hold them. But then the tires screeched, gravel spitting, and they lurched onto the road, leaving Ashbury Lane shrinking in the mirror. Neither spoke for several minutes. Only when the house disappeared behind the trees did Shaw finally say, voice unnervingly calm, "It doesn't want to be empty anymore." Helen gripped the wheel, knuckles white. "What the hell was that?" "You saw the door something broke through, not something dot someone. Or what's left of them." He tilted his head, studying her. "Your father's voice warned you, didn't it?" She didn't answer. Couldn't trust her voice. The radio on the dash hissed faintly, the static-like breathing, but no words followed. She wanted to throw it out the window. They parked 2 miles away at a diner still lit despite the late hour, sitting in a corner booth, coffee steaming between them. Helen laid the photographs on the table. The waitress gave them a curious glance, but didn't ask. Shaw flipped through the images with deliberate care. Someone wanted you to see these, to pull you deeper. These weren't taken, Helen snapped. Her voice cracked louder than she intended. That one, she jabbed a finger at the photo of her father holding her as a child. It never happened. I'd remember. And that one of me in front of the house. That picture hasn't been taken yet. It's impossible. Shaw leaned back, expression unreadable. Then it's not a house. It's a memory machine. A parasite that feeds on lives, on moments. It shows you pieces of what you are, what you could be, what it wants you to become. That's how it lures you back. Helen's stomach churned. Why me? Because of your father. Because you carry his blood, his choices. Maybe he left something inside that house, something unfinished. And now it's calling you to finish it. The words settled like stones in her gut. She thought of Connor's fear, of the missing rookie officer, of the stack of vanished case files. Always the same house. Always police. Always silence afterward. She whispered, almost to herself, it doesn't just eat cops. It keeps them. Shaw's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Approval, pity. Which means they're still in there. Her pulse quickened. You think my father? Shaw shrugged. I think if you don't go back, you'll never know. And the house won't stop until you do. Helen stared into her coffee, the steam twisting like smoke. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to burn the badge and pretend none of this existed. But she remembered the voice, the way it cracked on her name, the tear laced through it. If her father was still trapped in there, in some form, how could she walk away? By dawn, they had made their decision. They returned to Ashbury Lane with the rising sun casting long shadows across the sagging porch. The house looked almost ordinary now, its menace muted by daylight. But Helen didn't trust it. They came on flashlights, weapons, rope, and Shaw's strange addition, a small reel-to-reel recorder. Why that? Helen asked as they unloaded. Machines catch things the human ear can't. If the house speaks again, I want proof. The inside smelled worse by daylight mildew thick enough to sting her nose, and a cut with a sour rot like spoiled meat. Dust swirled in shafts of light through broken windows, and the silence pressed heavy as a blanket. The basement door stood wide open now. The lock twisted into splinters, the hinges bent. A cold draft slithered from the darkness below. Helen gripped her weapon tighter. We go together. We don't split up. Shaw nodded, though his calm made her uneasy, like he wanted to see what lay ahead more than he wanted to survive. They descended the stairs slowly, boots crunching over plaster and grit. The air grew damp, thick with the stink of earth and iron. At the bottom, their beams swept across the basement. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, nailed into the wood, layered over each other until the boards themselves disappeared. Faces of officers in uniform. Some Helen recognized from precinct memorials, others from decades-old case files. Men and women, smiling, serious, young, old. Every one of them gone. Helen's chest tightened. Her father's face appeared among them, younger than she remembered, eyes burning with life. She reached out instinctively, fingers brushing the paper, but the photo was cold, wet as if it were breathing. Shaw moved along the wall, recorder humming, his flashlight skimming the sea of faces. It keeps them here, he murmured. Copies of lives. It's not just feeding, it's building something. A sound cut through the damp air. Breathing, not theirs. Helen swung her beam toward the far corner. Something shifted in the dark. Something big. It crawled forward on hands that weren't hands anymore, fingers stretched long, nails black and curved like claws. Its face was wrong, melted, sliding between features as though it couldn't decide who to be. One moment it was the rookie David Halloway, the next her father, then Connor's, then her own reflection staring back. The photographs trembled on the walls. Some peeled free and fluttered like dead leaves. Helen's heart thundered. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Dad." The creature froze. Its head cocked, jerking like a marionette. When it opened its mouth, the sound that came was unmistakable. Helen, her father's voice, thick with static. She staggered back, tears burning her eyes. "Dad, it's me." But then the face shifted again, the voice twisted, becoming a chorus, dozens layered together. "Stay with us." The walls rippled. Hands pressed through the photographs, paper tearing, the fingers clawed out, dozens of them reaching. Shaw snapped the recorder louder, its reel spinning furiously, catching every voice. He shouted over the noise, "It wants you to join them." "That's how it grows." Helen fired her weapon. Bullets ripped into the crawling figure, but no blood spilled, only shreds of photographs fluttering from its body. The voices wailed, deafening, the walls heaving as if the house itself were breathing. Shaw grabbed her arm. "We have to end it. Burn them all." Her mind reeled. Burn the photos. Burn the house. Her father's face stared back at her from the wall, eyes pleading. If she torched them, would she free him or erase him forever? The creature lunged, and Helen made her choice. The creature hurled itself forward, its body folding and unfolding like a grotesque accordion of stolen faces, voices bleeding together into a scream that rattled the beams above. Helen's ears rang. Her vision blurred, but her grip on the weapon didn't falter. Shaw yanked her sideways as claws scraped the concrete, sparks flashing where nails gouged the floor. "Helen!" Shaw shouted, pressing a lighter into her palm. His eyes burned with an urgency that almost looked like faith. "It's the photos. The faces hold it here. Burn them, or it'll never end." Her hand trembled. The lighter felt impossibly heavy, as if it already carried the weight of every choice she had avoided. On the walls, her father's face stared back pleading, alive, real. The monster's voice dropped suddenly, soft as silk, curling through the chaos like smoke. "Baby girl," her father's tone, cracked with warmth, the way he used to soothe her after nightmares. "Don't leave me in the dark. Don't kill me again." Tears blurred her sight. The photographs seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, the ethic with voices of the missing, all blending into one demand: stay. Shaw raised his own weapon, firing into the creature as paper fragments shredded and spun in the air. "It's not him," he yelled over the cacophony. "It's never him. It only knows what you want to hear." But what if he was wrong? What if her father was still inside, buried in that endless collage, waiting for her to save him? The thought dug into her like a knife. The creature lunged again, faster this time, slamming Helen against the wall. The photos behind her felt alive, sticky, clinging to her jacket. She clawed at them, tearing faces free. And for a heartbeat she swore she heard a scream that belonged only to her father. "Helen, do it. Now." Shaw roared, shoving a rag soaked in gasoline into her free hand. The choice screamed inside her skull, tearing her in two. Save her father and risk being pulled into the house herself or burn it all. Sever every tether and lose him forever. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad," and then she struck the lighter. The flame leapt hungrily, racing across the rag, touching the first row of photographs. The paper curled instantly, blackening, faces contorting in silent agony as fire consumed them. The voices shrieked as one, deafening. So loud it shook us from the rafters. The creature staggered back, its body unraveling as strips of paper peeled from its limbs and melted into ash. Helen pressed the flame higher, sweeping it along the wall. Photos burst into embers, raining sparks. Shaw hauled her away as the fire caught, spreading fast, greedy. The house groaned, timbers splitting, walls buckling under the weight of its own unholy collection. The voices didn't fade, they screamed louder, trying to bargain, seduce, threaten. Her father's voice cut through them, sharp and desperate. "Helen, no, please. Don't kill me, don't." Her hands shook, tears streaming. But she didn't stop. Every photo that burned was another chain broken, another stolen face released, and as the creature collapsed into a writhing heap, its last mask twisted into her father's features, gazing at her with unbearable sorrow. "Forgive me," she whispered, and turned her back on him. They scrambled up the basement stairs as flames surged, swallowing the dark. The floorboards buckled beneath their boots, smoke clawing at their lungs. Shaw smashed a window with his elbow. and they tumbled onto the frozen yard as the house exhaled a final roar. The fire devoured everything, an inferno against the pale morning sky. Helen coughed, choking on tears and ash, watching as the roof collapsed inward for a brief instant. The smoke rising from the ruins looked like faces, dozens of them lifting toward the sky. And then they were gone. Silence fell. Only the crackle of fire remained. Hours later, Helen sat on the hood of the cruiser, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Fire trucks had come and gone, leaving only a blackened skeleton where the house once stood. No report would ever capture what truly happened. The official version would be simple: squatters, faulty wiring, abandoned structure consumed by flames. Shaw leaned against the car, his recorder clutched in one hand. The reels were melted, warped, useless. Yet he stared at it like a relic. Proof's gone, he muttered. Maybe that's for the best, Helen said. Her voice was raw, thin. He studied her a long moment, then asked quietly, "Do you think he was in there?" "Your father." She closed her eyes, memory replaying the way his voice had broken, the way his face twisted in the flames. Her heart ached with a grief so deep it left her hollow. "I think whatever was left of him isn't suffering anymore." Shaw nodded, though something in his expression suggested he didn't fully agree. The silence between them was heavy, but not empty. The house was gone, the cycle broken, yet Helen knew the truth. Some part of it would always remain. The photographs might have burned, but the images were carved into her mind forever. Weeks later, she returned alone. Ashbury Lane was quiet, snow falling gently over the charred lot. Nothing remained but ashes and twisted beams. She knelt in the ruin, letting the snow soak her gloves, and whispered, "I did it, Dad." "I did it." The wind answered softly, a hollow rush through skeletal trees. For a moment just a heartbeat, she thought she heard his voice on the breeze. No longer desperate, no longer begging, just calm. "I know." Her eyes filled, but she smiled faintly. Whether it was real or her own need, it didn't matter. She had faced the house. She had let him go. And as she rose, brushing ash from her knees, she promised herself one thing: no officer, no daughter, no lost soul would ever be swallowed by Ashbury Lane again. The house was dead, but some nights, when the wind carried just right, Helen swore she could still hear faint whispers in the static of her radio reminders that some houses don't forget, even when they burn.